The Cullen Coven. The Cullen Coven is one of the largest stable vampire covens. It is also one of the few that does not drink human blood. The Cullens call themselves vegetarians because they instead choose to drink the blood of animals, putting more value on human life than do most of their peers. They consider the Denali clan their cousins, as that coven shares a similar philosophy. Abstaining from human prey takes the competitive aspect out of the hunt, and as a result, they are able to form stronger family bonds than traditional vampires. The Cullens prefer to stay in one place as long as possible, choosing cloudy climates where they can go outside during the day without revealing their inhuman nature. But after 6 or 7 years in one location, they are usually forced to move on before their lack of aging is noticed. They own several residences so that they can return to places they have especially enjoyed, but only after enough time has passed that they won't be recognized as the same people who once lived there. Each member of the coven maintains several well-tended identities, complete with the documents to support them, which allows the Cullens to establish themselves in new locations as necessary. Each time the Cullens move, the relationships they claim to share with one another may shift too. In one place, 2 members might pose as father and adopted son, in another, brothers or uncle and nephew. Regardless, the bonds of love and respect between members of the coven are immutable. The Cullen family began when Carlisle transformed Edward. They then traveled across the United States together, gradually adding more members to the coven. The family is currently made up of 8 vampires, 4 of whom have supernatural abilities beyond those of a normal vampire, and a vampire hybrid who also has psychic gifts. Carlisle Cullen, date of birth, circa 1640. Date of transformation, 1663, at approximately age 23. Source of transformation, an ancient vampire living in the sewers of London. Place of origin, London, England. Hair color, blonde. Eye color, blue when human, gold or black when vampire. Height, 6'2". Physical description. Carlisle has a well-toned medium frame, collar-length hair, and movie star good looks. He has a slight English accent from his youth, although he can speak with a flawless American accent. Special abilities. He does not possess a quantifiable supernatural ability. Education/occupation. He has attended many universities, both as a student and as a professor. He has studied a variety of subjects, ranging from science to music, and typically works as a doctor. Hobbies. He collects art and books. Vehicle. A black Mercedes S55 AMG. Family/coven relationships. He is married to Esme Cullen and considers Edward Cullen, Rosalie Hale, Emmett Cullen, Alice Cullen, and Jasper Hale his children, Bella Cullen his daughter-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen his granddaughter. Personal history. Carlisle's father was his only family. His mother died giving birth to him, and he had no siblings. As an Anglican pastor, Carlisle's father was a crusader against evil, leading hunts through London and the surrounding areas for witches, werewolves, and vampires. Self-righteous and compassionless, Carlisle's father caused many innocent people to be burned. When he grew too old, he put Carlisle in charge of these raids. However, Carlisle had a very different temperament. He was not as quick to see evil where there was none. He was smart and persistent, though, and he eventually discovered an actual coven of vampires living in the sewers. He gathered a group of hunters, and they waited for darkness to fall, suspecting that this was when the vampires would come out. When a thirsty vampire did emerge, he attacked the hunters. 2 were killed, and Carlisle was wounded. Knowing that anything infected by the monster would be burned, Carlisle hid himself in a nearby cellar. During the transformation, he never cried out, despite the agony he felt. When it was finally over, and he realized what he had become, he was horror-struck. He tried to destroy himself by jumping from great heights. and attempting to drown himself. When these methods didn't work, he tried to starve himself to death. A newborn vampire's thirst is overwhelming, but Carlyle found the strength to resist. Months passed, and Carlyle, filled with self-loathing, kept to the loneliest places he could find, places where he wouldn't stumble across a human. He understood his willpower was weakening. One night, a herd of deer passed by, and, crazed with thirst, Carlyle attacked without thinking. After feeding, he felt his strength and sense of self return, and he realized he could live without killing human beings. He would feed on animals, just as he always had, drinking their blood now instead of eating their flesh. Knowing that his father would hate him, no matter how he lived his new life, Carlyle never returned home. He watched his father a few times from a distance, but never made contact. Carlyle had always been eager to learn, and now he had unlimited time. By night, he studied music, science, and medicine in the universities of Europe. During his travels, Carlyle encountered others of his kind. Most vampires Carlyle crossed paths with responded to his natural amicability. In this way, he is a novelty among vampires. While studying in Italy in the early 1700s, Carlyle was discovered by the Volturi, an ancient coven of vampires founded by Aro, Caius, and Marcus. The vampires of this coven were very different from the sewer dwellers of London. They were refined and cultured, and Carlyle admired their civility. But Aro, Caius, and Marcus never stopped trying to change Carlyle's aversion to what they called his natural food source, and Carlyle never stopped trying to persuade them of the value of his pro-human philosophy. Over time, a legend formed among the humans in Italy of a Stregone Benefici, or good vampire, who was the avowed enemy of evil vampires, though Carlyle was always on friendly terms with the Volturi. After about 2 decades in Italy, Carlyle decided to travel to the New World. He was growing increasingly lonely and longed to find other vampires who believed there was a life for them that didn't involve murder. When Carlyle reached America, things didn't change for him the way he'd hoped. He didn't find other vampires like him. He was, however, able to begin a career in medicine. He felt that by saving human lives, he could compensate in some measure for the existence of vampires. Carlyle couldn't risk more than a cordial acquaintance with his co-workers for fear of exposing what he was, and his enforced solitude and lack of intimacy pained him. So he began to deliberate creating a companion. However, he was reluctant to steal a life the way his had been stolen. For decades, he debated with himself about whether or not it was right to doom another to the life of a vampire. The plea of a dying woman, Elizabeth Mason, helped him make his decision. In 1918, Carlyle was working nights at a hospital in Chicago as an epidemic of Spanish influenza raged through the city. Elizabeth's husband died in the first wave of the epidemic, but Elizabeth and her teenage son Edward managed to stay alive for a while longer. Carlyle was with Elizabeth on her last night. She begged him to save her son, intuiting that Carlyle was more than what he seemed. She died less than an hour later. Her son lay in the room with her, his own death imminent. The goodness and purity in Edward's face finally convinced Carlyle to take action. Carlyle bit Edward, affecting his transformation. Both Carlyle and Edward were surprised to discover Edward's ability to read minds, but due to his experience with the Volturi, Carlyle quickly understood the phenomenon. Carlyle and Edward began traveling together, using the cover story that Edward was the younger brother of Carlyle's late wife. In 1921, they moved to Ashland, Wisconsin, and there the Cullen coven gained another member. While working in a local hospital, Carlyle was called to the bedside of a young woman grievously injured in a suicide attempt. Carlyle was surprised to recognize Esme Evanson, whom he had treated for a broken leg about 10 years earlier when she was a teenager. It was almost impossible for him to believe that this vivacious, beautiful girl had come to this tragic end. Carlyle knew he could not save her life through conventional methods. Influenced by his memory of the happy girl Esme had been, Carlyle bit the dying woman and took her to the home he shared with Edward to wait for the transformation to be complete. When it was over, Carlyle apologized for what he had done, but Esme was not unhappy with the situation. She remembered their first meeting too, and had always considered Carlyle her ideal of a gentleman. Carlyle and Esme soon fell in love and were married. The coven's cover story now changed. Edward began to be introduced as Esme's brother. In many ways, however, Edward regarded Carlyle as his father and Esme as his mother. Carlyle now had more than the companion he'd longed for. He had a family. Carlyle wasn't expecting the coven to get any bigger, but one night, while on his way to work at a hospital in Rochester, New York, he discovered the nearly lifeless body of Rosalie Hale lying in the road. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and left for dead. Struck by the waste of a beautiful young life, Carlyle brought Rosalie home and transformed her, hoping in the back of his mind that one day she might be a companion for Edward. 2 years later, Rosalie had only reluctantly assimilated to vampire life. The relationship Carlyle had hoped would spark between her and Edward hadn't happened. So when Rosalie carried the dying Emmett McCarty to Carlyle and begged Carlyle to change him, Carlyle did as she asked. Rosalie wanted a companion of her choosing, and Carlyle felt he could make amends to her in this way. At this point, Carlyle and his family moved to Washington State, west of the Olympic Peninsula. To his surprise, he discovered a local Native American tribe who had the ability to transform into wolves. The Quileutes had previous experience with vampires, whom they called the Cold Ones, and they considered it their sacred duty to protect humans from them. Unwilling to harm the werewolves, Carlyle brokered a treaty with the leader of the pack, Ephraim Black, utilizing Edward's mind-reading abilities to communicate. The treaty established boundary lines for both the Cullens and the Quileutes. The Cullens agreed never to hurt a human, which included never transforming a human into a vampire, since the Quileutes considered transformation the same as killing. Both the vampires and the werewolves promised to keep the true nature of the other secret from humans. The family continued to move when necessary, and in Denali, Alaska, Carlyle found what he'd been looking for when he set off for America. A coven of vampires who shared his philosophy and drank only animal blood. The two covens ended up close friends, viewing each other as extended family. The Cullen family grew when they were joined by Alice Brandon and Jasper Whitlock, who had been traveling together as a couple. Since the family was now quite large, a new cover story was devised. Edward, Alice, and Emmett were now said to be the adopted children of Carlyle and Esme. Rosalie and Jasper, who looked alike, were passed off as Esme's twin orphaned cousins. Eventually, the Cullen family returned to Washington State, this time to Forks, somewhat north of their previous location. Carlyle took a job at Forks Hospital and became well regarded in the community as a doctor and a citizen. Famous quotes: "Look at my son, his strength, his goodness, the brightness that shines out of him. How could there not be more for one such as Edward?" New Moon, Chapter 2. I've never been to veterinarian school. Eclipse, Chapter 25. I can imagine what you think of me for that, but I can't ignore her will. It wouldn't be right to make such a choice for her, to force her. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 12. She hasn't gone for his throat even once. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. It's an interesting twist, like she's doing the exact opposite of what you can. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 34. Edward Anthony Mason Cullen. Date of birth, June 20th, 1901. Date of transformation, 1918, at age 17. Source of transformation, Carlyle Cullen. Place of origin, Chicago, Illinois. Hair color, bronze. Eye color, green when human, gold or black while vampire. Height, 6'2". Physical description. Edward is thin and lanky, but muscular. He has untidy bronze hair and boyish looks. Special abilities. He can read the thoughts of anyone in close proximity to him, with the exception of Bella Cullen. Education/occupation. He has 2 medical degrees, but has never worked as a doctor. His other graduate degrees are in literature, mathematics, law, mechanical engineering, several languages, art history, and international business. Edward owns his family's house in Chicago, and about every 50 years or so he inherits his family fortune from himself. Hobbies. He loves music. He plays a variety of instruments, sings, and has an extensive vinyl and CD collection. He also enjoys collecting cars. Vehicles. A silver Volvo S60R and a silver Aston Martin V12 Vanquish. Family/Cullen relationships. He is married to Bella Cullen and has a daughter, Renesmee Cullen. He is the natural son of Edward and Elizabeth Mason and the adopted son of Carlisle and Esme Cullen. He thinks of himself as a brother to Alice and Emmett Cullen as well as to Jasper and Rosalie Hale. Personal history. Edward was born to Edward and Elizabeth Mason on June 20, 1901. He was their only child. His father, a successful lawyer, provided Edward with many advantages, including music lessons and the opportunity to attend private school. However, although his father provided for Edward in material ways, he was emotionally distant and often away from home on business. This absence was made up for by Edward's close relationship with his mother. He was the center of her life. Edward excelled at his studies and became an accomplished pianist. As he grew older, Edward became enamored of the life of a soldier. World War I raged during most of his adolescence, and Edward dreamed of the day he could join the battle. His mother's greatest fear was that she would lose Edward in the war. Every night she prayed that it would end before her only son turned 18 and was old enough to enlist. 9 months before his 18th birthday, the Spanish influenza hit Chicago, infecting all of Edward's family. Gravely ill, they were treated in the hospital where Dr. Carlisle Cullen worked. Edward's father quickly succumbed to the disease. On her deathbed, and fearing for her son's life, Elizabeth Mason begged Dr. Cullen to do what was necessary to save her son. Somehow, she seemed to know Dr. Cullen had a supernatural means to save Edward. Moved by Elizabeth Mason's plea, and having already thoroughly considered the idea of creating a companion, Carlisle took Edward from the hospital late that night, carrying the unconscious boy to his home. There, Edward became the first human Carlisle changed into a vampire. Edward formed a deep bond with Carlisle, who became a father to him, gaining Edward's trust and love the way his natural father never had. It was Carlisle who first realized that Edward possessed mind-reading abilities. He noticed Edward answering questions that Carlisle had not asked aloud. Edward always had a knack for reading people. After his transformation, that ability blossomed into a true psychic talent. Edward's new family gained a member when Carlisle transformed Esme to save her life after her suicide attempt. Edward was still young enough to appreciate a mother's care, and Esme gave it to him. Edward grew to love his new father and mother, but as much as he respected Carlisle's ideals and valued Esme's gentleness and tenderness, he couldn't help questioning what it meant to be a vampire. After almost a decade of living with Carlisle, Edward decided to leave his new parents and experience an alternate style of vampire life. He began drinking human blood instead of animal blood. Rather than become a true villain in his own estimation, he became a vigilante. Edward used his mind-reading abilities to target serious criminals as his victims: murderers, rapists, abusers, pedophiles, and the like. For his first victim, he tracked down Charles Evanson, Esme's abusive ex-husband. In the end, though, he couldn't accept taking so many human lives, no matter the justification, and in 1931 he returned home to Carlisle and Esme and their way of life. Edward knew from hearing their thoughts that Carlisle and Esme were sometimes concerned that he had no romantic love in his life. When Carlisle transformed Rosalie Hale and brought her into the family in 1933, Edward knew that Carlisle and Esme hoped she and Edward would become a couple. But as stunningly beautiful as Rosalie was physically, Edward was not attracted to her somewhat shallow and self-absorbed mind. The feeling was mutual. Edward and Rosalie always treated each other as brother and sister and were not always on the best terms. When the Cullen family lived in Alaska, Edward had another opportunity to find romance, this time with Tanya, the leader of the Denali coven, a group who also practiced a vegetarian lifestyle. Though Tanya was interested in Edward, he did not return that interest. It wasn't until the Cullen family returned to Forks in 2003 that anyone captured Edward's attention. There, Edward met a human girl named Bella Swan. Bella was markedly different from every other human he'd ever met in two impossible-to-overlook ways. First, her blood sang for him the way no other humans had. Second, her mind was the first he'd encountered that was entirely closed to his mind-reading abilities. Famous quotes. On the contrary, I find you very difficult to read. Twilight, Chapter 2. No blood, no foul. Twilight, Chapter 3. What if I'm not a superhero? What if I'm the bad guy? Twilight, Chapter 5. Honestly, I've seen corpses with better color. I was concerned that I might have to avenge your murder. Twilight, Chapter 5. I've decided that as long as I was going to hell, I might as well do it thoroughly. Twilight, Chapter 5. Your number was up the first time I met you. Twilight, Chapter 8. You weren't concerned about my diet? Twilight, Chapter 9. Hadn't you noticed? I'm breaking all the rules now. Twilight, Chapter 10. Be safe. Twilight, Chapter 12. Yes, you are exactly my brand of heroine. Twilight, Chapter 13. I may not be a human, but I am a man. Twilight, Chapter 14. It will be as if I'd never existed. New Moon, Chapter 3. Amazing. Carlyle was right. New Moon, Chapter 20. Marry me first. New Moon, Chapter 24. Well, I'm nearly 110. It's time I settled down. New Moon, Chapter 24. I was all braced for the wrath that was going to put grizzlies to shame, and this is what I get? I should infuriate you more often. Eclipse, Chapter 8. I was that boy who would have, as soon as I discovered that you were what I was looking for, gotten down on one knee and endeavored to secure your hand. I would have wanted you for eternity, even when the word didn't have quite the same connotations. Eclipse, Chapter 12. The way you regard me is ludicrous. Eclipse, Chapter 19. Would you please stop trying to take your clothes off? Eclipse, Chapter 20. I lived through an entire 24 hours thinking that you were dead, Bella. That changed the way I look at a lot of things. Eclipse, Chapter 21. But if I had been able to take your place last night, it would not have made the top 10 of the best nights of my life. Dream about that. Eclipse, Chapter 23. I just beheaded and dismembered a sentient creature not 20 yards from you. That doesn't bother you? Eclipse, Chapter 25. I love you. I want you. Right now. Eclipse, Chapter 27. You're awfully small to be so hugely irritating. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 4. I'm not ready for you to kill me yet, Jacob Black. You'll have to have a little patience. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 9. Even you, Jacob Black, cannot hate me as much as I hate myself. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 9. I am truly sorry for the pain this causes you, Jacob. Though you hate me, I must admit that I don't feel the same about you. I think of you as a brother in many ways, a comrade in arms, at the very least. I regret your suffering more than you realize, but Bella is going to survive, and I know that's what really matters to you. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 17. Now it's your turn not to break me. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 20. It goes against the grain, letting you wrestle with lions. I was having an anxiety attack the whole time. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 21. Maybe I'm hoping she'll get irritated and rip your head off. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. I am her father, not her creator, her biological father. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 30. Don't be sad for him. He's happy now. Today, he's finally begun to forgive himself. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 39. Esme Ann Platt Evanson Cullen. Date of birth, 1895. Date of transformation, 1921 at age 26. Source of transformation, Carlisle Cullen. Place of origin, Columbus, Ohio. Hair color, caramel brown. Eye color, brown when human, gold, black when vampire. Height, 5'6". Physical description, Esme has a heart-shaped face. Her body is small and slender, but curvy. Special abilities. She does not possess a quantifiable supernatural ability. Education and occupation. She has degrees in architecture and art, and she has also studied photography. Hobbies. She loves to restore old houses. Vehicle, none. She borrows one of her family members' cars whenever she needs a vehicle. Family/coven relationships. Before her transformation, she was married to Charles Evanson and had a son who died shortly after birth. She is currently married to Carlisle and considers Edward Cullen, Rosalie Hale, Emmett Cullen, Alice Cullen, and Jasper Hale her children, Bella Cullen her daughter-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen her granddaughter. Personal history. Esme Ann Platt grew up on a farm outside of Columbus, Ohio. As a child, she lived a happy life, although in her teen years she found it hard to conform to the behavior that was expected of a respectable young lady at the time. In 1911, Esme fell and broke her leg while climbing a tree. The local doctor was away, and she ended up being treated by Dr. Carlisle Cullen, although she mentioned it to no one. At the time, meeting Carlisle affected her deeply. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, genuinely thoughtful and truly interested in what she had to say. Unfortunately, he was in town only briefly and soon left, but she never forgot him. Esme's friends began to marry, and before long she was the only one still unwed. Esme wanted to fall in love herself, but she never found anyone who measured up to her memory of Carlisle. Esme tried to persuade her father to allow her to pursue a teaching position in the West, but he didn't think it was respectable for a lady to live alone in the wilds. Instead, her father pressured her to accept the son of a family friend who wanted to marry her. Several years Esme's senior, Charles Evanson, had good prospects. Esme was indifferent to Charles, but not opposed to him, so she agreed to the marriage to please her father. Esme quickly discovered that the marriage was a mistake. Charles' public face was very different from his private one. He physically abused her. Her parents rejected her plea for asylum. They counseled her to be a good wife and keep quiet. When Charles left to fight in World War I, it was an enormous relief. When he returned, unscathed in 1919, it was a nightmare. Soon after his return, Esme became pregnant. The baby was Esme's motivation to escape. She would not bring a child into Charles' home. Esme ran away and went to stay with a cousin in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. When her husband discovered her whereabouts, she fled to Ashland, Wisconsin, where she posed as a war widow. In order to support herself, Esme pursued her old dream of being a schoolteacher. Esme began to build a life for herself and her baby. She loved the unborn child more than her own life, but 2 days after her son was born, he died of lung fever. Feeling as if she had lost everything, Esme walked to a cliff outside of town and jumped. Esme regained consciousness in excruciating pain. Despite the pain, Esme was amazed to see Carlisle again, not sure if she was in heaven or hell. When the transformation was over, Carlisle explained that he'd turned her into a vampire in order to save her life. Esme was not as upset as he had expected. Adjusting to her new vampire nature had its challenges, and there were times when the call of human blood was too strong for her to resist. She was happy to be with a man she'd always idolized. Her youthful crush transitioned easily into full-fledged love. Before long, Carlisle and Esme married. She never lost her maternal instincts, and as the oldest of the Cullens, she automatically fell into a mothering role with Edward and later the other members of the family. Famous quotes. "Well, I do think of them as my children in most ways. I never could get over my mothering instincts. Did Edward tell you I had lost a child?" Twilight, chapter 17. "He's been the odd man out for far too long. It's hurt me to see him alone." Twilight, chapter 17. "I prefer to referee. I like keeping them honest." Twilight, chapter 17. "We'd never allow anything to happen to you, sweetheart." Eclipse, chapter 4. Rosalie Lillian Hale. Date of birth, 1915. Date of transformation, late 1933 at age 18. Source of transformation, Carlisle, Cullen. Place of origin, Rochester, New York. Hair color, golden blonde. Eye color, dark blue, almost violet when human. Gold or black when vampire. Height, 5'9". Physical description. Rosalie has strikingly beautiful features and a stunning, statuesque physique. Her wavy blonde hair falls halfway down her back. Special abilities. She does not possess a quantifiable supernatural ability. Education and occupation. She has earned degrees in electrical engineering, business, and astrophysics, and has studied medicine. The last is a favor to Carlisle to help keep him up to date with the latest advances. Hobbies. She enjoys enhancing cars and doing anything mechanical. Vehicle. Red BMW M3 convertible. Family/coven relationships. She is married to Emmett Cullen. She considers Carlisle and Esme Cullen to be her parents, Edward Cullen, Alice Cullen, and Jasper Hale to be her siblings, Bella Cullen to be her sister-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen to be her niece. Before her transformation, she grew up with her biological parents and 2 younger brothers. Personal history. Rosalie Hale was born to a banker and his wife in Rochester, New York. Luckily, the bank her father worked at stayed solvent through the stock market crash and resulting economic downturn. The Great Depression did not seriously impact Rosalie's family the way it did many less fortunate families. Her parents were eager to do better, though, to move in higher social circles. As Rosalie grew and her beauty increased, they hoped her loveliness would open doors for them. Rosalie enjoyed her parents' pride in her looks, her father's pleasure in buying her beautiful clothes, her girlfriend's envy, and the admiration of every man she passed. The result of all this attention was that Rosalie tended to be self-absorbed and rather shallow, with a focus on the material. At 18, Rosalie was considered the most beautiful girl in Rochester, and possibly the state of New York. Her family was moderately wealthy, and she wanted for nothing. Rosalie envied no one, except for her friend Vera. Vera had a husband who loved her, and the most adorable baby boy, Henry. Rosalie longed for a husband and a baby of her own. When Rosalie caught the eye of Royce King II, the son of the richest man in Rochester, she felt that she was on her way to having absolutely everything she'd ever wanted. Her parents were overjoyed. A whirlwind courtship and plans for an extravagant wedding quickly followed. One night, a week before the wedding, Rosalie was walking home after a visit with Vera. A few blocks from her street, she heard the drunken laughter of a group of men. A moment later, she realized one of them was Royce. She'd never seen Royce drunk before, and didn't know the dark side of his character. Royce and his friends brutally assaulted and raped Rosalie. Thinking her dead, they abandoned her in the road. Moments later, Carlisle Cullen found Rosalie and transformed her to save her life. He hoped that Rosalie might make a suitable companion for Edward, but they never viewed each other in that way, though they did come to love each other as brother and sister. One of the first things Rosalie did as a vampire was to take revenge on Royce and his friends. She hunted her attackers down one by one, saving Royce for last because she wanted him to suffer psychologically from the fear of knowing that something was coming for him. She tortured all of her attackers to death, but she didn't drink their blood. She was repulsed by the idea of having any part of them inside her. She and Carlisle, and later Bella, are the only vampires in the Cullen clan who have never killed humans for blood. Though vengeance was satisfying in its way, Rosalie remained deeply unhappy in her vampire life. She missed her human family greatly. More than that, the chance to have what she most longed for, a husband who loved her, a baby of her own, had been taken from her along with her humanity. 2 years later, Rosalie's life changed. While the Cullens were living in Tennessee, she discovered a man, Emmett McCarty, being mauled by a bear in the woods. Something about the man reminded Rosalie of her friend Vera's young son, and Rosalie didn't want him to die. She rescued Emmett and took him to Carlisle, and asked Carlisle to transform him, even though she hated her own vampire existence and knew her request was selfish. But Emmett didn't see Rosalie as selfish. He fell in love with her, and he easily adapted to vampire life. He and Rosalie soon married, and did so repeatedly over the decades. Rosalie loved being the center of attention as the bride, and Emmett loved making her happy. The two have sometimes lived as a couple apart from the rest of the Cullen family. Famous quotes. "I'm so very sorry, Bella. I feel wretched about every part of this, and so grateful that you were brave enough to go save my brother after what I did. Please say you'll forgive me." New Moon, Chapter 22. "It's just that this is not the life I would have chosen for myself. I wish there had been somebody there to vote no for me." New Moon, Chapter 24. "Would you like to hear my story, Bella? It doesn't have a happy ending, but which of ours does? If we had happy endings, we'd all be under gravestones now." Eclipse, Chapter 7. "Over my pile of ashes." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 10. "Oh, wonderful. I knew I smelled something nasty." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 15. "You got food in my hair." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 15. "I'll help him toss you, dog. I owe you a good kick in the gut." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. Emmett McCarty Cullen. Date of birth, 1915. Date of transformation, 1935, at age 20. Source of transformation, Carlisle Cullen. Place of origin, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Hair color, dark brown, almost black. Eye color, blue when human, gold or black while vampire. Height, 6'5". Physical description. Emmett has an imposing frame. He is both tall and extremely muscular. His hair is curly and nearly black. He has dimples when he smiles, and his face has an innocent quality not often seen in a grown man. Special abilities. He does not possess a quantifiable supernatural ability. Occupation and education. He has attended high school and college multiple times. He never finished any particular degree, preferring instead to move quickly from one subject that interests him to the next. Hobbies. He loves competitive sports and games, especially anything that involves a physical challenge. Vehicle, red Jeep Wrangler, modified for off-roading. Family/coven relationships. He is married to Rosalie Hale. He considers Carlisle and Esme Cullen to be his parents, Edward Cullen, Alice Cullen, and Jasper Hale to be his siblings, Bella Cullen to be his sister-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen to be his niece. Personal history. Emmett grew up in the small town of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, part of a large Scotch-Irish family. He had what his parents considered a wild adolescence. Never one to worry about consequences, Emmett ran with a wild crowd that drank, gambled, and womanized. Emmett was always a help to his family, however. He was an excellent hunter and woodsman, and always kept the McCartys supplied with game. When he was 20 years old and out on a routine hunting trip in the Smoky Mountains, he was attacked by a large black bear. Emmett was close to losing consciousness when he thought he heard a second bear fighting with the first. He figured they were battling over who would get his corpse. Then the growling stopped, and Emmett felt like he was flying. He managed to open his eyes and saw what he thought was an angel. When the transformation began and the fiery agony spread through his body, he was sure he'd died and gone to hell. When the pain left him, Emmett learned what had really happened to him. In his delirium, he'd seen Rosalie as an angel and Carlisle as God, but in fact, they were both vampires, and now he was a vampire too. He took the truth in stride. Emmett was never one to worry about situations outside of his control. He continues to think of Rosalie as his angel. With his naturally happy nature, Emmett adjusted easily to the idea of being a vampire. Learning to control himself, however, was more of a difficult challenge. In the years just after his transformation, Emmett was unable to resist human blood. The Cullens were forced to move often until Emmett learned to restrain himself. He genuinely bonded with all the members of his new family, and aside from his dietary lapses, also made their lives more comfortable. Emmett's easygoing nature brought out Edward's more optimistic side, and Rosalie became a different person altogether. When Emmett, ever practical, wanted to provide for his human family, Edward gave him a small fortune which Emmett left in a bag on their doorstep. Even though he knew he could never again be part of their family, he wanted to ease the burden of losing a strong, hard-working son. After doing what he could for them, he didn't look back. Eventually, Emmett and Rosalie married, and have remarried more than once over the years, because Rosalie enjoys the process and the attention so much. At various times, they have lived apart from the Cullen family as a married couple. Famous quotes. Hell yes. New Moon, Chapter 24. I'm really glad Edward didn't kill you. Everything's so much more fun with you around. Eclipse, Chapter 4. Nice to have toddlers guarding the fort. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 11. Did you get in a couple of good swipes? Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. So it's still standing? I would have thought you two had knocked it to rubble by now. What were you doing last night? Discussing the national debt? Breaking Dawn, Chapter 25. I'm sure you'll ace all your classes. Apparently there's nothing interesting for you to do at night besides study. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 25. About time somebody scored around here. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 25. She's too tame. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 26. Not much wild about you, is there? I bet that cottage doesn't have a scratch. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 26. Mary Alice Brandon Cullen. Preferred name, Alice. Date of birth, 1901. Date of transformation, 1920 at age 19. Source of transformation, an unnamed vampire who worked in a mental institution. Place of origin, Biloxi, Mississippi. Hair color, black. Eye color, dark brown when human, gold or black when vampire. Height, 4'10". Physical description. Alice is tiny and graceful. Her hair is very short and spiky because her head was shaved in a mental hospital, and her hair was in the process of growing out when she was transformed. Special abilities. She can see into the future, although what she sees is based on decisions being made. Thus, she must wait for a decision to be firmly rooted in the mind or acted upon before she can see the end result. Her talent is limited to humans and vampires because she has been both. She cannot see the futures of werewolves or hybrid vampires. Education and occupation. She has attended high school and college several times. She has degrees in fashion design and international business. One of the ways she makes money is by using her gift for seeing the future to predict windfall investments in the stock market. Hobbies. She plays the stock market and loves designing and shopping for new clothes. Vehicles. A canary yellow Porsche 911 Turbo. Family/coven relationships. Alice is married to Jasper Hale. She considers Carlisle and Esme Cullen to be her parents, Edward Cullen, Rosalie Hale, and Emmett Cullen to be her siblings, Bella Cullen to be her sister-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen to be her niece. She had a human sister named Cynthia and has a human niece who still resides in Biloxi. Personal history. Mary Alice Brandon, or Alice as she was commonly known, lived in a middle-class home in Biloxi, Mississippi, with her parents and her sister Cynthia, who was 9 years younger. Her father was a jeweler and a pearl trader. He bought the pearls from local divers and then moved the pearls inland to be sold in a more profitable market away from the coast. His job kept him away from the family for days at a time. Alice's mother tended to their home and the orchard on their property and took care of Alice and Cynthia. The girls were fairly close, despite the wide age difference between them. Alice had the gift of foresight even as a little girl, but her premonitions were not nearly as strong as they would be later in life. They came to her more as feelings than visions. At first, her parents thought her premonitions were amusing. Alice is always right, they would say when the 5-year-old dressed herself in a slicker even though the sky was blue. Later, of course, the rain would begin. Grandma will be here soon, she would announce. They would laugh and put out an extra plate. As Alice grew older, she became more hesitant to share her predictions. She hated looking ridiculous when her premonitions turned out to be wrong. Weather was the easiest for her to predict correctly because it didn't involve people and their tendencies to change their minds. By age 10, she rarely voiced her predictions at all, but those she did came true, and often enough that people started to talk. That uncanny child of the Brandons was seldom asked to other children's birthday parties. Alice's mother loved her deeply and counseled her to keep quiet about her premonitions. By the time Alice turned 18, she'd learned to ignore her gift, for the most part, but occasionally she felt compelled to speak. When she did, it sometimes turned out badly, such as when Alice warned a friend not to marry a certain man. Her friend ignored her, and it was revealed that the man's family had a history of insanity. Rather than blame herself or her husband, the friend whispered to others that Alice had put a curse on her. On another occasion, one of Alice's favorite cousins planned to go west to seek his fortune, and Alice begged him not to. The cousin died in an accident on the road, and his parents, Alice's aunt and uncle, blamed Alice for jinxing his trip. People started to use the words witch and changeling when talking about her. Then Alice had her most terrifying vision. She saw her mother being murdered by a stranger in the woods on her way into town. She told her mother what she had seen, and her mother listened to her. Alice's mother kept her daughters in the house with the doors locked and a pistol loaded. When Mr. Brandon returned home from a trip 2 days later to a dirty house full of terrified women and empty of food, on Mrs. Brandon's insistence, he searched the woods near the road but found nothing. He was angry with Alice's damned stories and ordered Alice not to put everyone in a panic again. Alice began to be haunted by flashes of the stranger, still stalking her mother. When she told her parents what she'd seen, her father was furious with Alice's hysteria. He insisted that the family go about their usual routine, but he was often gone, and when he was, Alice's mother followed Alice's desperate warnings as much as possible. Still, she had to shop for supplies and tend her orchard. When a month passed and no one had seen the man, Mrs. Brandon grew less wary. She began returning her friends' visits and attending sewing circles. She took the pistol with her every time she left the house, at first. After 2 months, she started to forget. One night, Alice had a perfectly clear vision of the man in a Model T running her mother's buggy off the road just outside of town, where there was a steep drop. Alice's mother had already left home in the buggy. Alice ran after her, seeing in her mind the stranger watching the crashed buggy to be sure there was no movement inside. Next, she had a vision of the man driving away from the scene of the accident. Alice knew she was too late, but she kept running. The death of Alice's mother was declared accidental, and Alice's protestations to the contrary were met with disdain and suspicion. Alice's father ordered her to be silent. Mr. Brandon remarried within 6 months of his wife's death. The woman was a blonde Yankee from Illinois who was only 10 years older than Alice. Mr. Brandon had frequently sold pearls to her jeweler father in the past. The new Mrs. Brandon was quite cold to Alice, though she made a pet of the younger Cynthia. Even unguided by visions, Alice was bright. Careless, offhand comments by her new stepmother and evidence of longer preparation for this marriage than should have been possible made Alice suspicious. She took her suspicions to her father, who raged at her for suggesting ill of his new wife. The night after her confrontation with her father, Alice had a vision of him and the stranger who had killed her mother. Her father was giving the man money. Then Alice had a vision of the man standing over her with a knife. Too late, she realized that she'd confided in exactly the wrong person. Alice rushed into the night and ran 5 miles to the home of her aunt and uncle, her only living relatives. Alice beat on the door until they answered, then gasped out her story. Her father had arranged to have her mother murdered and was sending the killer after her next. The aunt, who still blamed Alice for her son's death, shoved Alice off the porch and told her husband to get the dogs and drive Alice away. Alice hurried 10 more miles back to town and arrived at the town marshal's house to find it lit and busy. Both her aunt and father were already there, and the marshal had been informed that Alice had gone mad. Alice accused her father of his crimes and her stepmother of complicity, but no one listened. Most people already thought Alice was crazy or possessed by the devil. The marshal was paid well to have Alice put quietly into an asylum 2 counties away. Few people knew what had actually happened, and everyone who did know the truth was very understanding about the Brandons' desire to pretend Alice had died. In the mental asylum, Alice's head was shaved during the threat of a typhoid outbreak. She also endured electroshock therapy. The treatment caused her to lose her memory, but it also allowed her naturally cheerful and humorous disposition to return, since she no longer remembered the sadness and horror of her recent life. Unknown to Alice, a vampire was working as a groundskeeper at the asylum where she was incarcerated. This vampire, who was taking advantage of this pool of humans who could die without so much notice being taken, formed an attachment to Alice. He kept her from the shock treatments and other horrors whenever he could. He learned of Alice's abilities. She always knew when he was coming to visit her. He would bring hidden objects with him to see if she could guess what he had. She always got it right. Then Alice had a vision of James. It occurred the moment he caught her scent, old and faded, in her hometown 2 counties away. She saw James find her. She told her only friend, the vampire, and he knew that what she was seeing was fact. He planned to escape with her, but Alice saw James catching up to her anyway. He offered other options, but every choice ended with James. Then the groundskeeper decided to change her. Alice saw that this would be very close. There might not be time for her blood to transform sufficiently for James to gain nothing in killing her. The vampire had heard enough. He bit Alice immediately and took her away to hide her. Knowing this would barely slow James, he put himself in James's path to delay him. From Alice's vision, he knew James was a strong hunter and that it was a fight he would not win. After her transformation, Alice awoke alone. The pain of the transformation had the same effect on Alice as the shocks. She remembered nothing of her life in the asylum, or of the vampire who had transformed her. She was unaware of James as the reason for her change. Fortunately, Alice's psychic gifts were now greatly enhanced and strengthened. She was able to see the best future for herself. Alice's first clear vision as a vampire was of Jasper Whitlock. She knew that Jasper was her future mate, but she also knew that he wasn't ready for her yet. Instead of going to look for him, she waited for him to find her. In the meantime, she practiced with sporadic success living as a vegetarian, knowing that in time she and Jasper would end up with the Cullen family. In 1948, Alice went to the small diner in Philadelphia where she knew she and Jasper were destined to meet. Though her greeting was characteristically cryptic, Jasper's ability to feel the emotions of those around him allowed him to appreciate the magnitude of the occasion. Alice was already in love. Jasper quickly learned to reciprocate. To please Alice, Jasper began practicing a vegetarian lifestyle as well. By 1950, when they joined the Cullens, Alice was able to control her thirst as well as the rest of the family did. Jasper continues to have more difficulty with self-restraint than the others. Alice and Jasper were married sometime after joining the Cullen family. Alice loves all of her adopted family, but has a special bond with Edward. Thanks to his mind-reading abilities, he is the only one who truly understands what it is like to live with constant visions of the future. Famous quotes. "You do smell nice. I never noticed before." Twilight, Chapter 15. "It sounded like you were having Bella for lunch, and we came to see if you would share." Twilight, Chapter 16. "Do you think any of us want to look into his eyes for the next 100 years if he loses you?" Twilight, Chapter 20. "I will always tell you the truth." Twilight, Chapter 20. "Edward, you have to do it." Twilight, Chapter 23. "Would you like to explain to me how you're alive?" New Moon, Chapter 17. "Honestly, I think it's gotten all beyond ridiculous. I'm debating whether or not to just change you myself." New Moon, Chapter 19. "How strongly are you opposed to Grand Theft Auto?" New Moon, Chapter 19. "I think she's having hysterics. Maybe you should slap her." New Moon, Chapter 22. "Who invited the werewolf?" Eclipse, Chapter 17. "Please, Bella, please. If you really love me, please let me do your wedding." Eclipse, Chapter 21. "No one dressed by me ever looks like an idiot." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 1. Bella gets in the way. She's all wrapped around it, so she's blurry, like bad reception on a TV, like trying to focus your eyes on those fuzzy people jerking around on the screen. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 14. "Esme, give her a few pointers on acting human." Breaking Dawn, Chapter 25. Jasper Whitlock Hale. Date of birth, 1844. Date of transformation, 1863, at age 19. Source of transformation, Maria. Place of origin, Houston, Texas. Hair color, honey blonde. Eye color, brown when human, gold or black when vampire. Height, 6'3". Physical description. Jasper is tall with a medium build, and his hair falls to just above his collar. He has many scars from years of dealing with newborn vampires, but these scars are easily visible only to others with supernaturally good eyesight. Special abilities. Jasper has the ability to both feel and manipulate the emotions of those around him. Education and occupation. He has attended high school and college several times. He has degrees in philosophy and history. Hobbies. He is a natural scholar and an avid reader. He has a shrewd mind for both business and battle tactics. Vehicle. Jasper has a silver Ducati motorcycle given to him by Edward. Family/coven relationships. He is married to Alice Cullen. He considers Carlisle and Esme Cullen to be his parents, Edward Cullen, Rosalie Hale, and Emmett Cullen to be his siblings, Bella Cullen to be his sister-in-law, and Renesmee Cullen to be his niece. He also feels brotherly affection for nomadic vampires Peter and Charlotte. Personal history. Jasper Whitlock grew up in Houston, Texas. When he was almost 17, he lied about his age and volunteered to join the Confederate Army. He rose quickly through the ranks, being promoted over older, more experienced men. People thought of Jasper as charismatic. This was likely due to, in part, to early traces of the psychic ability Jasper would develop after his transformation. Even as a human, Jasper had a gift for empathizing with and influencing the emotions of those around him. By the time of the Battle of Galveston, Jasper was the youngest major in the Confederate Army. After leading a group of refugees from Galveston to Houston, he encountered 3 extraordinarily beautiful women: Maria, Nettie, and Lucy. Maria, a vampire and head of her coven, decided to transform Jasper into a vampire for the newborn army she was creating. Maria chose her newborns more carefully than was usual. She'd chosen Jasper first because of his rank, which meant he'd had success in a military system. The second because of that charismatic quality that had always drawn other humans to him. Jasper was naturally gifted as a warrior and a leader. His ability to control emotional environments around him, although not fully developed, made Maria's army more effective. A bond formed between Jasper and Maria. She came to depend on him more and more, and grew quite fond of him. For Jasper, Maria's army was the only vampire life he had known, and he had no idea anything else was possible for him. One of Jasper's regular tasks was to execute members of the coven who had outlived their newborn strength and developed no other skills that made them valuable to the army. Eventually, he had help in this task from Peter, another former newborn who had proved himself worthy of being kept around. Jasper liked Peter for his oddly civilized nature. They became friends. One night, as he and Peter were carrying out the grim task of dispatching age-weakened newborns, Jasper could feel the unusually difficult emotional toll that was taking on his friend. When Jasper called out for a newborn named Charlotte, Peter suddenly erupted in fear and fury. He yelled for Charlotte to run, then bolted after her. Jasper could easily have caught them, but he chose not to. As the years passed, Jasper became depressed, tired of always being surrounded by the devastating emotions of those he killed. Maria was not pleased with this alteration. He began to notice a change in her emotions around him. Sometimes she was fearful, sometimes malicious. He knew Maria was thinking about getting rid of him, and Jasper began planning how he would destroy her first. At this critical moment, Peter came back to find Jasper. He told Jasper of an alternative he had never imagined. Peter and Charlotte had been living peacefully in the north for the last 5 years, meeting several other covens that coexisted amicably. Jasper left with Peter immediately. He traveled with Peter and Charlotte for a few years, but even in the more peaceful north, his depression didn't lift. Though he was killing only humans now, he was still subject to their emotions as they died. Jasper's misery stayed with him, and eventually he left Peter and Charlotte. He tried to kill less often, but the thirst always grew overwhelming. In 1948, Jasper encountered Alice. She approached Jasper as if they were close friends and told him he'd kept her waiting for a long time. Jasper was puzzled and wary, but Alice's joyful emotions impacted him greatly. When Alice held out her hand, he took it, and he felt an unfamiliar emotion: hope. Alice explained her vision of the Cullens, and she described the lifestyle of Carlyle and his family. Jasper found it all hard to believe, but he and Alice set off to find them. Once they did, Alice and Jasper were quickly welcomed into the family. Jasper started using the last name Hale because he and Rosalie looked related, and people assumed they were siblings. It made sense to go along with what humans already seemed inclined to believe. At Carlyle's suggestion, Alice and Jasper were married shortly after joining the Cullens. Jasper became fond of the members of his new family, but never developed the deep bond with them that Alice did. Jasper chose to live with the Cullens in order to stay with Alice, and because the vegetarian lifestyle, though exceptionally difficult for him, freed him from the negative emotions that had so depressed him. Famous quotes. "I can feel what you're feeling now, and you are worth it." Twilight, chapter 19. "You held out your hand, and I took it without stopping to make sense of what I was doing. For the first time in almost a century, I felt hope." Eclipse, chapter 13. "I'd never seen a newborn do that, stop an emotion in its tracks that way. You were upset, but when you saw our concern, you reined it in, regained power over yourself." Breaking Dawn, chapter 20. Isabella Marie Swan Cullen, preferred name Bella. Date of birth September 13th, 1987. Date of transformation September 11th, 2006, at age 18. Source of transformation Edward Cullen. Place of origin Forks, Washington. Hair color brown. Eye color brown when human, red as a newborn vampire, which will change to gold or black. Height 5'4". Physical description: Bella's dark brown hair is long, thick, and straight. She has a wide forehead with a widow's peak and a narrow jaw with a pointed chin. Her eyes are large and widely spaced, her cheekbones prominent, her nose thin. Her lips are out of proportion, a bit too full for her slim jawline. Her eyebrows are darker than her hair and are straighter than they are arched. She is slender but not muscular. As a human, Bella was fair-skinned, with chocolate brown eyes. As a vampire, she is even paler, and her eyes are bright red. They will change to gold or black as her human blood leaves her system. Bella's features were heightened and perfected by her transformation. Special abilities: her mind is impenetrable. No one can read her thoughts unless she allows it. She can shield herself from all types of psychic attacks and learns to shield those around her. Occupation and education: she is a graduate of Forks High School. As a human, she held a part-time job at Newton's Olympic Outfitters. Hobbies: Bella enjoys reading, especially the classics, and listening to music. Vehicles: red 1953 Chevy pickup truck, a 1960s Honda motorcycle, a 2006 Mercedes Guardian, a red Ferrari F430. Family/coven relationships: she is married to Edward Cullen, and Renesmee Cullen is her daughter. Her father is Charlie Swan. Her mother, Renee, is married to Phil Dwyer, Bella's stepfather. Bella views Carlyle and Esme as her father and mother-in-law, and Jasper Cullen, Rosalie Hale, Emmett Cullen, and Jasper Hale as her sisters and brothers-in-law. Personal history: Bella Swan was born in Forks, Washington. Her parents, Renee and Charlie, divorced when she was still a baby. Bella lived with her mother, growing up mainly in Riverside, California, and Phoenix, Arizona. Up until 2002, Bella visited her father in Forks for a month every summer. The climate in Forks was unpleasant to Bella, though, and when she was old enough, she insisted that Charlie meet her in California for a few weeks in the summer instead. Bella didn't fit in with her peers in California or Arizona. She had the feeling of being a little out of sync with everyone, even the person she was closest to, her mother. Renee was very extroverted, impractical, and absent-minded. She liked to dabble in the multitude of hobbies. From necessity, Bella turned out quite the opposite. At an early age, she took over most of the household responsibilities. When not being the adult, she preferred quiet pastimes like reading, in part because she was extraordinarily clumsy. Her naturally responsible nature carried over into her schoolwork, where Bella usually received A's. Her plan for the future was to get a degree in education and teach like her mother. Renee's career was one thing Bella truly respected about her mother. However, she intended to teach at the high school level. When Renee fell in love with and married minor league baseball player Phil Dwyer, Bella chose to move in with her father in Forks so Renee could go on the road with her new husband during baseball season. Bella arrived in Forks in January 2005 to finish high school in the town where she was born. On her first day at Forks High School, she met Edward Cullen. Famous quotes. About 3 things I was absolutely positive. First, Edward was a vampire. Second, there was a part of him, and I didn't know how potent that part might be, that thirsted for my blood. And third, I was unconditionally and irrevocably in love with him. Twilight, Chapter 9. I don't speak car and driver. Twilight, Chapter 11. You said that Rosalie and Emmett will get married soon. Is that marriage the same as it is for humans? Twilight, Chapter 14. Well, it's no irritable grizzly. Twilight, Chapter 15. Rosalie is jealous of me? Twilight, Chapter 15. I'm betting on Alice. Twilight, Chapter 24. Oh, I'm with the vampires, of course. Twilight, Epilogue. Which is tempting you more, my blood or my body? New Moon, Chapter 2. Nothing. I just hadn't realized before. Did you know you're sort of beautiful? New Moon, Chapter 8. Could you, try to not be a werewolf? New Moon, Chapter 13. My mortality. I'm putting it to a vote. New Moon, Chapter 23. I would want Carlisle not to have to do it. I would want you to change me. New Moon, Chapter 24. Am I the only one who has to get old? I get older every stinking day. Eclipse, Chapter 5. We're a bit sensitive to blood around here. I'm sure you can understand that. Eclipse, Chapter 10. I punched a werewolf in the face. Eclipse, Chapter 15. Show me the damn ring, Edward. Eclipse, Chapter 20. Kiss me, Jacob. Kiss me and then come back. Eclipse, Chapter 23. Edward, I know who I can't live without. Eclipse, Chapter 27. It's a good thing you're bulletproof. I'm going to need that ring. It's time to tell Charlie. Eclipse, Chapter 27. Does this screw my total, or do we start counting after I'm a vampire? Breaking Dawn, Chapter 13. It feels complete when you're here, Jacob, like all my family is together. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 15. I can see what everyone's been going on about. You stink, Jacob. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster? Breaking Dawn, Chapter 22. We're going to tell her I spent hours in there playing dress-up. We're going to lie. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 24. It's over. We've all been sentenced to die. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 28. I am all over this. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 38. Now you know. No one's ever loved anyone as much as I love you. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 39. Famous conversations with Edward. Please tell me just one little theory. Bitten by a radioactive spider? That's not very creative. I'm sorry, that's all I've got. You're not even close. No spiders? Nope. And no radioactivity. None. Dang. Kryptonite doesn't affect me either. Twilight, Chapter 5. I smelled the blood. People can't smell blood. Well, I can. That's what makes me sick. It smells like rust and salt. What? It's nothing. Twilight, Chapter 5. I dazzle people? You haven't noticed? Do you think everybody gets their way so easily? Do I dazzle you? Frequently. Twilight, Chapter 8. How old are you? 17. And how long have you been 17? A while. Twilight, Chapter 9. Don't laugh, but how can you come out during the daytime? Myth. Burned by the sun? Myth. Sleeping in coffins? Myth. I can't sleep. At all? Never. Twilight, Chapter 9. And so the lion fell in love with the lamb. What a stupid lamb. What a sick, masochistic lion. Twilight, Chapter 13. Renesmee Carly Cullen. Nickname, Nessie. Date of birth, September 11, 2006. Date of transformation, born a vampire-human hybrid. Place of origin, Forks, Washington. Hair color, bronze. Eye color, brown. Height, 3'5". Physical description, Renesmee has fair skin, pink cheeks, dimples, and bronze-colored ringlets. Special abilities. She can show people her thoughts by touching their skin. So far, no one has been able to block her talent. Education and occupation. She is taught at home by her parents, extended family, and friends. Hobbies. She likes to hunt with Jacob, read, study, and spend time with her parents and the other members of the Cullen family. Vehicle. She doesn't have a vehicle yet. Family/coven relationships. She is the natural daughter of Edward and Bella Cullen. Charlie Swan and Renee Dwyer are her natural grandparents. Carlisle and Esme Cullen are her adoptive grandparents through their relationship to Edward. She thinks of Rosalie Hale and Alice Cullen as her aunts, and of Jasper Hale and Emmett Cullen as her uncles. Jacob Black has imprinted on her. Personal history. Renesmee has both vampire and human characteristics. She has inherited many physical gifts from her vampire heritage. Her teeth are nearly as strong as vampire teeth, her skin almost as durable as vampire skin, and her muscles perform with supernatural strength, though not quite at vampire level. Mentally, she learns with vampire speed and retains with vampire perfection. Due to her human side, she has a beating heart and a functioning circulatory system. She also can eat human food and sleep. She maintains a body temperature greater than that of a normal human, at around 105 degrees Fahrenheit. From conception, she has grown at a greatly accelerated rate. It is expected that she, like other hybrids, will stop growing when her body reaches its adult size. Her physical growth is greatly outstripped by her mental development. Famous quotes. But I can show you more than I can tell you. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 30. I'm not dangerous at all. I love humans, and wolf people like my Jacob. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 30. Mama, you're special. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 31. I love you too, Mama. We'll always be together. Breaking Dawn, Chapter 35. The Cullen Home. The Cullen's house in Forks is more than 100 years old. Painstakingly restored by Esme, it is painted white, is 3 stories tall, and features a deep porch that wraps around the front of the house. The back south-facing wall is 3 stories of glass. The inside of the first story is open and bright, with few internal walls. To the left of the front door is a wide central staircase. To the right is a raised area with a grand piano in the center. Also to the right are a dining room and kitchen, but these are more for show than for actual use. Behind the stairs is the office of CEE Incorporated, the Cullen's personal company, where they manage all of their business dealings. At the top of the staircase, on the second floor, is the room that Rosalie and Emmett share. Moving around the central stairs clockwise, first comes Jasper's study, then Alice and Jasper's room, with an attached closet that is larger than the room itself. Carlisle's office is next, with an area inside for Esme's study and Carlisle's personal library. During Bella's pregnancy, the library was converted into a combination exam and delivery room. The room that Carlisle and Esme share is at the top of the staircase on the 3rd floor. Edward's room is also on this floor, facing south. The remainder of the 3rd floor is called the library and is used for any technically illegal activity such as forging birth certificates and hacking into computer systems, which the Cullens must do in order to maintain the various identities needed to live unnoticed in human society.